Good evening, everybody. All right, we are going to take care of the second half of our comparative systems of government. So we left off last time and we had simply talked about a dictatorship and a monarchy. What we want to talk about next is the next evolution of a government where what we're seeing this trend is citizens with very few rights. And we classified two types of governments with an overarching theme as a totalitarian government. When we think about totalitarian government, the first thing we should think about is total. Absolute rule, but this time, instead of a single individual, whether it's a military person in the case of a dictatorship or a king in the case of a monarchy, what we're thinking about is the absolute rule by the state. And by state, I mean the government. And the scary thing about this, and the dangerous thing about this compared to the other ones, is the state doesn't die on its own. Yes, a government can be overthrown. We understand that. That's what Locke and Hobbes talk about, is when you should overthrow them. But if you have a bad king, he's going to die at some point, and you can hope the next king is good. If you have a bad dictator, if it's bad enough, long enough, eventually what ends up happening is hopefully somebody else takes care of that. With a totalitarian government, there are no limits to your authority. You can do whatever you want as the state. They can control every facet of life, whether it's public or private. In other words, even your personal life. In a true totalitarian government, they would control what you think. Individual citizens then have absolutely no power to make decisions. You can't even decide who you're going to marry, where you're going to live. And we classify totalitarian governments, or our examples of totalitarian governments in the real world, come in two forms. The first is a fascist government. And we think of fascism mostly associated with Nazi Germany. But that's not the only example of fascism. It's just the ones you guys are most familiar with. We see this as a single political party that rules. They end up gaining power legitimately, and then they end up overthrowing the government or expanding their power. Again, thinking about Locke and what he described as illegitimate forms of rule, and one of them is an expansion of power by those originally legitimately in power. Hitler is voted in as chancellor, ends up disbanding the Reichstag, getting rid of the parliament system in Germany, and assumes total control. Again, this is a faction of totalitarianism. The government controls all of the economy. But one of the key differences between a fascist government and a communist government, which is what we're going to talk about next, is that private citizens still own the factors of production. And remember, we'll talk more about factors of production, but I listed them. They own the cows. Private citizens still own that. The key is, though, the government tells you what you can do with them. What are you going to make? How much are you going to make? All of those kind of things. Fascists tend to advocate conflict. They like warfare as a means of progression. They advocate conflict, warfare. They believe in Darwinian survival. In other words, the fittest will rise. War weeds out the weak. The idea that war is good because those who aren't good enough end up dying, end up being replaced. Strong governments survive. Our second example of a totalitarian government is a communist government. And we see this either in the top example of former communist Russia, pardon me, or in the bottom flag with China. And China isn't a complete communist government. I shouldn't say that. China is a communist government, but they have instituted some capitalist reforms in their economy. Again, a single political party rules. You are a member of the Communist Party, or you are not politically involved. Again, a faction of totalitarianism. So right now we should be saying, well, how can I tell the difference between fascism and communism? The government controls all of the economy. Well, that doesn't help you because the government controlled the economy when it came to fascism as well. But the difference is the government owns all the factors of production. The government owns the farms, they own the factories, they own the cars, they own the houses, they own the apartment buildings, they own all of the stores. Everything is government owned. You work for the government. And when we talk about totalitarianism in communism, we can easily see it in simple things like China's one-child policy. They will literally tell you how many children you can have. The individual is secondary to the group. There's a Chinese proverb that says it's the tallest blade of grass that is cut down. And what that is talking about is the idea is not to try and stand out. It's to try and conform. And in America, we see a very different thing. We want tall blades of grass that are individuals. Capitalist government, democratic governments want the best to succeed. And that's also true in fascism. Fascism wants the tall blades of grass because the tall blades of grass are the ones who are working harder, who are winning. Again, in this communist government, as with the fascist government, as with basically every other government we've studied so far, the individuals have no rights. All right. We've talked about a bunch of governments that it would honestly suck to live in. Again, they're setting up rules that make the government or individuals completely in control and forcing all of the citizens, the mass population, as subservient. So what's our alternative then? It's democracy. Democracy is complex, but it's based on two simple principles, and they are freedom and equality. And these are hard because if I have freedom, how come they're limited? If I have freedom, how come I don't have success as other people? And then we talk about equality and we say, well, is it really equal? If Mr. Colvin makes $42,000, $43,000 a year and Bill Gates is worth 30 or 40 billion, well, it depends on how you define equal. And that's what's challenging but wonderful about democracy is we're constantly reinventing what it means. This year, 2012, on our ballot in Minnesota, we're arguing about what does equality mean when we talk about gay marriage. Is it okay to deny people who are homosexual the right to marry? Or is their lifestyle a choice and therefore not subject to the same things? These are critical debates we're going to have in our state and in our classroom this year. Democracy relies on a constitution, that Locke or Hobbes social contract theory. This is where, again, we sacrifice freedom and get protection. I give up some of the things I want to do in order for other people not to be able to do everything they want to do as well, so that I have some protection. But we tend to err on the side of freedom. We'll talk a lot about this when it comes to our law unit. We believe in popular sovereignty. Popular meaning people, sovereignty meaning rulership. The people rule. It's not a monarch that's in charge. It's not the government that's in charge. It's not a political party that's in charge. We believe in the idea that the citizens are in charge and we give power to the government. And the critical thing there is that we can take that power away at any time. Citizens have legal rights. We are protected from ourselves, from each other, and especially from the government. The government is not above the law. The government must follow the laws that it writes. The government cannot write laws that it's exclusive to. And we'll talk about, is that being followed? There's a debate about how Congress treats itself. And we'll have to argue and discuss whether or not Congress is following this idea. We believe in the rule of law, which again is that everyone follows the law. No one is above it. All right, we will see you tomorrow. Have a good day.